Welcome to the wonderful world of watercolor. The Master's Art Course takes great pleasure in presenting one of America's outstanding artists, Louis J. Cape.
I like to make many small sketches on the spot, and then take these and work them up into larger paintings in my studio, where the conditions and the environment gives me a greater ease and freedom to paint. I like to do my sketching with an HB pencil. These small sketches are very, very helpful to me, and I make many of the same subject. When sketching these out in larger sizes, I like to just suggest the outline and drawing and the composition rather than to get into any great deal of detail. I do my sketching sitting down and work from various sketches, and when I feel that I have the composition and the arrangement that I desire, I'm ready to paint. Now, this is about as far as I like to carry the drawing on the watercolor paper. This painting measured about 16 by 20, and some of the detail here that I wanted greater information on, I find very, very helpful. Like the boy on the sampan and the small boats, and I can refer to this from time to time as I go along. I have no objection to changing things around from my original sketches. This many times makes for a better composition. When I have felt that I have completed the pencil sketch to my satisfaction, I arrange my colors using the warmer colors on the top. That's the reds and the yellows and the browns, and the colder colors, the blues and Payne's gray, at the bottom of the palette. I use an ordinary butcher's tray. I find this an excellent palette for mixing colors and getting the proper area for mixing. I also like very much to have a white sheet of paper alongside of my board where I can try out the values as I go along. I find that having the proper value is more important to me than the right color. The painting is started with the sky, using a darker value at the top, and as it comes forward, I use more water, which lightens the value and gives for a nice feel, and this forms a sort of a backdrop for the painting generally. I use a large brush in putting this area in, a number 12. And the colors I used here were Payne's gray, a little touch of ultramarine blue, and a touch of yellow ochre. When the sky has been completed, I let that dry, and while that's drying, I put in the very light area of the water. This again, I use a very large brush, and as the water comes forward, I use a little darker value there. This gives form, and then also I try to use a horizontal strokes in painting the water area. You see how very nicely the center of the palette I can use for dragging the colors across one another, and it makes for very, very excellent mixing. The next step would be to put in the distant hills. This again is put in with a large size brush. I use burnt umber here with a little touch of ultramarine blue. As it comes forward down towards the water line, I add more blue because this gives me the distance and a little darker value that I want in that particular area. the water itself will sort of run and mix and work the colors together, which really helps to give the form and interest and shape. And that's the beauty of working in transparent watercolor, is that the water actually does a great deal of the work for you. Now I want to put in here the very, very darkest value in the painting, and that's the open end of the sand pan. It's really a very, very dark area, and it almost looks black, but it is not black. I don't use black at any time. I can almost achieve black by Prussian blue and Van Dyke brown, and yet it has color, and it has life to it. As I come forward here, I put a little burnt umber in there. It gives it a little more warmth. I want a little more warmth in that area than I have in the open end. Now a stroke of yellow ochre gives that warmth, and then I want to soften that edge a bit, and I use a little clear water with that to just get that hard edge off of there. The brush is kept clean at all times. Every time I change to a color, I make very sure that my brush is clean and I can go into that next color with a clean brush, using plenty of water, of course, at all times, and plenty of pigment. Here, again, it's being mixed to dark value, and I try it out along the side there so that I'm very sure that the value is right. Then and only then do I apply it to the paper. This area is the dark canvas that covers the one end of this sand pan. I'm using here just a trifle smaller brush. It's number 10. It's still a good size brush for this area. I try to let the size of the brush determine the area that I'm going to cover. If it's a large area, I want a good big size brush. If it's smaller, well then of course I have to go to a little smaller brush. However, if I were to choose one brush, I would certainly pick the number 12, because this I find a very, very practical brush, and for many years this was the only brush I ever used, because a good number 12 you can get to a very fine edge and point. This area now we want to put some folds in there, some wrinkles, and then these are softened up with clear water to give it form, give it a little life, and not any great amount of detail, but rather suggested. I left some of the areas in the end of the sand pan there that you can see white, because, and painted the dark value around it. The reason for this was simply that I could judge my values a little better than had I put the light values in first. My brushes are 12, 10, 8, and 7, and 6. I probably use the 12 and the 10 more than any of the others, but at least it's nice to have them handy if they're available if I need them. Now I want to put in some of the, suggest some of the buildings in the background. They're done very simple, no detail really to speak of, rather just suggested spots of color. There's no attempt to put in windows or doors or anything. It's just merely to keep them in the distance and suggested of a little brighter color. On the warm side, I'd use here the burnt umbers and the burnt siennas, a touch of yellow ochre, and along the shadow side, or maybe a little more blue, a little colder color in there, and just suggested. This way, they hold their place. on the side of the hillside, and for composition's sakes here, I raised the roof a little over the hill to break that line that might otherwise be a little monotonous. This is, again, for better composition. Here I am mixing vermilion with cerulean blue. This gives me a very, very fine combination for the light area of the canopy that will cover this sampan. And I use horizontal strokes here, as you can see, because this is more or less the way this particular canvas is stretched over this area of the sampan. And as it comes down, I add a little more blue, a little darker color, again to give it the form and shape. And I let this area dry, and while that is being dried, I go into some of the smaller boats in the background and put the boat alongside of the sampan. It's done very, very simply with simple strokes, again using Prussian blue and Van Dyke brown for this very, very dark area. You'll notice that I use a little lighter values first in the boats in the background. I'll go into those later on with a little darker color and pick up some of the detail there. The shadows in this area will add greatly to bring out the form and the punch and the shape that I want to get into this particular painting. This is one of the things really that attracted me, was the contrast between the lights and the darks. And even a stroke such as this here gives shape to this area that I feel otherwise may have been rather on the flat side. Again, these dark accents help to give the picture form, especially this area of the sampan. They liven it up. The side of this sampan, again, is a very, very dark area. And I don't want it to look just like a flat, dark mass. I'd like to get the feel in here that things are going on, that ropes are hanging from the side, and possibly pots and pans, but in no detail whatsoever. Here again, I left the light areas white, and I will go into those later and pick out and choose the proper color and the value. And that's why that's being done that way. A little accent on some of the boats in the distance will, again, give this form and help to give it the interest and the shape that I want to get in this particular area. The light areas that are on the side of this sampan are now being put in with yellow ochre, a little touch of cerulean blue, a little burnt sienna, and really drawing with the brush. There's no attempt here to just fill in the spots, but rather to sketch with the brush. Again, always keeping the brush clean. It's vitally important. And here with clear water to soften these edges so that they will become part of the side of that sampan. And these small sketches have become very, very helpful in the various areas such as this here. And an accent here and there in the distant boats and figures are very, very helpful. The little ropes and posts that extend from the sampan holding up the various canopies and posts are just suggested, as well as a little boy here now, very simply, no attempt at detail. Here, a little alizarin crimson with just a little touch of ultramarine blue to give his costume a little life and color. The light areas of the costume are just kind of picked out with the clear water. Then we go in and put in an accent here and there. Very simply, no attempt to put any great amount of detail. Again, the brush always has to be kept clean, and some of these edges of the shadow can now be softened up. The most interesting part of this whole picture, I believe, to me, is the painting in the water area. Really, the shadow of this sampan. This was really one of the things that attracted me to this subject, was the interesting shape and this reflection of this sampan in the water. And of course, the strokes are horizontal strokes because I wanted to simulate the feel of the water. Although there were no great amount of waves or action, yet we want the water to look like there's movement there. And again, Prussian blue was used and Van Dyke brown. I did use a little stronger brown and put in some of the accents as it was closer to the sampan, because this gave me the reflection in the water that I wanted, a warm feel. You can see from some of the detail that the action of the water is there, just the movement. I wanted to just get the feel that there was a movement of that water. The wash on the line had a little more color to a picture that otherwise really didn't have a great deal of color. And one of the final steps is to take a razor blade and with its edge cut in or pick in some of the highlights in this very, very dark side of the sampan. Because no white was used in the painting, it's strictly transparent watercolor, this is the way I achieve my accents in the light or in place of white. Just pick right through to the paper. It adds a great deal of interest to an otherwise very, very dark area. I think the real test of looking at a painting that you feel is about complete is to put on a mat and give it a good look. And I like to do this, and then possibly with the mat on, go in and put in an accent here and there, touch it up a little bit. But the main attraction of this subject to me was here was a watercolor that had so many things: sky, hill, landscape, houses, figures, boats, reflections, just about everything that a good subject needs.